Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher, Philly voice and Inside the Birds podcast, set to join me as the Eagles do have some news today. They have brought back Dallas Goedert. What does that mean? I want to get into what Brian Baldinger said right there as well. With Geoff Mosher from Philly Voice and the Inside the Birds podcast. He's set to join me right now on another edition of Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, right here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. So I don't know that you heard the bite, Mosher. I see you're trying to get your stuff all put together over there, so I will allow you to try to do that here. But before we get to Geoff Mosher, the bite from Brian Baldinger, is not an unfamiliar one. It is that Justin Simmons wants to play for the Eagles, and he's saying, look, he would add leadership. He would add all these things that the Philadelphia Eagles are lacking right now at that spot. So I guess the question I would have to start things off for Mosher here, we'll get into Goddard and all that stuff as he joins us now for Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Everybody keeps thinking, Moshe, that Justin Simmons is like the next guy to come. Now you got the Goddard thing figured out. We'll get your thoughts on that. But I guess my question for you is, if the Eagles were to sign a player like Justin Simmons at safety, do they sign him with the thought of we want you to be our starting safety, or we just want you to add competition to push Brown and Makuba?
That's a good question. But, if you're Justin Simmons and you've accomplished what you've accomplished, it's not like you're a defensive end who can rotate in like Chris Long a couple of years ago when they won a Super Bowl. I would think if you're Justin Simmons and you're signing with the team and you're doing so and being picky to win a championship, you're not signing to be the third safety, right, in a big nickel package. You're Justin Simmons. You want to be a starting safety. So that's where the difficulty comes in, because Vic Fangio seemed very, very excited to get Drew Makuba when the Eagles drafted him. They have another young kid in Sidney Brown, and we can talk about his fit or lack thereof in the defense, but he's still a third-year player with a lot of upside and a really good special teamer. So they want to play him. So where are you putting Justin Simmons on the field if he signs, right? You got Reed Blankenship, so how does that work out? Yeah,
that's what I was trying to pick your brain on here is and I agree with you, like if you're telling Justin Simmons, hey, we want to sign you, is Simmons saying, well, am I the starter, or are you bringing me in here to be a backup? Am I Devin White? Like, can I get cut? You know what I'm saying?
And money. Think about the money. Like if you're Justin Simmons and you sign a 1-year deal for like $600,000 guaranteed or $650 guaranteed, which is kind of the standard 1-year deal. Maybe it's now $700. It used to be $650, $700. That basically means that you're not a sure shot to make the roster. So why are you going through all that effort if somebody else is giving you at least a chance to start somewhere else? Or if it's not, even though I guess then you're Justin Simmons and do I want to even play any longer when I'm not even guaranteed a starting spot or even guaranteed $1 million to play?
Well, and that's the thing. He knows the system. So it's not like you're bringing a player that you're not sure of. Kevin Byard, they brought him in here. He was definitely a very good player, but didn't fit this system. Justin Simmons would come in here and fit this system, and that goes back to, do you draft Andrew Makuba in the second round thinking you want him to sit the whole year and have Justin Simmons play, or do you want him out there playing right away? That's where I think the whole Simmons thing gets a little murky.
To me, it's not. 95% of your draft picks in the second round, you want to come in and start right away. And even if you don't, you have that expectation that they can. There are some rare instances. We've seen this with both Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens, but we know that the Eagles, with the offensive line, like to draft a year early. Cam Jurgens did have to sit his entire first year. They knew that was a possibility. Then Jason Kelce came back, and they put him at right guard because they knew he couldn't sit 2 years in a row, so they had him start at right guard. Landon Dickerson was drafted like 38th overall, darn near a first-round pick. He was supposed to sit, Mike, that first year because they had Brandon Brooks and Isaac Seumalo, but Seumalo wound up getting hurt pretty early in the year, out for the year. Dickerson slides in. But the Eagles don't draft safeties. That's not one of those positions where they're like, all right, we don't mind waiting a year for this guy to develop. It's just not that important a position for what they do, even in a Vic Fangio defense, that they'll have that. Now, if a guy just isn't ready to play, like Davion Taylor a couple of years ago in round 3, then he's not ready to play, and they're not going to force him to be on the field. But that's not the expectation when they drafted him in the second round.
With the amount of turnover, though, 4 starters they need to change. Would you feel better with a veteran player at safety? You're changing corner. You're changing, tackle. You're changing your edge rusher. Would you rather have a guy at safety that is not a first-year player?
I mean, theoretically, sure, but it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I don't want to make this situation comparable to others, but it's sort of like, would you rather have Zach Bond or somebody else that you don't know competing against Nakobe Dean or Devin White? And Devin White turned out to be not the right guy for the scheme and system, and thankfully Zach Bond came on. Now, Simmons is different. He's been a really good player in this scheme, and I'm sure he's fine. But I think his best days are probably behind. That's why he's a free agent right now. And I think if you're the Eagles, you understand, and Howie Roseman has said this, that you have to move on to younger players and get them on the field and hope that their surrounding environment is good enough so that you can work through their flaws, like they did with Nolan Smith, who for a year and a half basically didn't play a whole lot, but they had other pass rushers to compensate. So could the Eagles, if they're really struggling in training camp and Vic Fangio says to Howie, I don't think Makuba's ready and I don't think Sidney Brown's ready either, what do we do? Then Howie either looks toward Simmons, who will probably still be available, or a trade for somebody else, or there's always safeties on the scrap heap who can at least get in there and give you some type of serviceable play. Not great until you're ready to get Makuba coached up.
Yeah, you mentioned safety on the scrap heap. That's where Simmons I go back to and say, hey, Vic Fangio saying, this guy's not a scrap heap player. He knows what I'm doing. We can win with this guy, right? I feel like that one's still fluid. This because of how young they are at that safety spot. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, listen, there was an argument last year going into the year, and I think there was this conversation about it, about getting Justin Simmons to put next to C.J. Gardner-Johnson because Reed Blankenship was part of that collapse of 2003, and he's an undrafted free agent, and he played really well last year, which made people forget about the fact that people were talking about bringing in Justin Simmons around this time last offseason. So I don't know that Vic has some – listen, I think Vic likes his players, but I don't know if he gets all that nostalgic. I just go have this guy who was good for me 5 or 6 years ago. I think he likes the idea of young talent that he can mold and groom like he's done with Jalex Hunt and Nolan Smith and other young guys, Jalen Carter on the defense.
All right, let's get your thoughts now that this Goedert thing has taken a turn. There was a lot of pontification that they were going to get rid of Goedert. How did this come full circle to where he's back?
Well, it took, honestly, both the Eagles, and I think I said this to you the other day, I think Howie Roseman handled the situation really well. He had no intention of paying Dallas Goedert $14 million a year, but he also did not publicly speak of Dallas Goedert like he was a nobody, an afterthought. And now the obvious response is, well, yeah, he's trying to trade him. No, I think he was genuinely being honest about the team being better with Dallas Goedert and working to find a really good situation for both. So Goedert, in my opinion, Mike, and I had sort of an argument with Adam on the podcast, I think he had a little bit more leverage than we might think because he was owed this money. It wasn't guaranteed. The only leverage he had or against him that the Eagles had would they cut him to not pay him the money. And Mike, there was no way they were going to cut him. Look, they have no alternative at that position that plays even nearly at the high level. So in my opinion, Goedert could have said, you're not going to cut me. I'll call your bluff, showing up to work and said, see, pay me my $14 million. And the Eagles would have been in a bind. And then maybe Howie would have had to said, well, fine, I'm just trading you to Jacksonville for a 6-rounder.
Well, now, apparently it looked like he wasn't all that excited about the options that were presented to him.
And that's my point. Like Goedert was given permission to seek a trade and he may not have found the money, or maybe he found something that was close, but that just didn't appeal to him. He can look at Josh Sweat's situation last year and say, okay, I will take this pay cut and I will go and try to have the best year of my career, stay healthy. I'll be 32. That works against me. I'm not a pass rusher, but maybe if I just ball out and have a great year, I'll get a better contract than teams are willing to give me right now.
So what does that position now look like? Because they did sign a bunch of guys. They didn't draft one, but they did add a bunch of guys here. You guys talked about your 53-man roster predictions on the Inside the Birds podcast on offense. Now you have Dallas Goedert back. How does that change? It looked like they were in dire need. Now all of a sudden, do you feel good, or they still need to change that room?
Well, they don't need to change it now. They just need to make sure that by this time next year, they have a better alternative and replacement, whether it's in the draft or via trade market. But what it means for the time being is that one of Kylan Granson, Grant Calcaterra, and Harrison Bryant are probably not going to make the team because you don't need 4 tight ends. And you have EJ Jenkins that you're also developing who could always come back on the practice squad. And so then it becomes which one do we like most? Which one brings the most value to our offense? Because they're all kind of, the 2 free agents are on similar deals. And then Calcaterra is the less expensive alternative because he's on the 4th year of a 4th-year deal. But that also might make him some trade value. Who knows? We'll see.
All right, Geoff Mosher, real quick, a couple questions that just came in regarding that from some of the listeners. This one is from a big fan of the Football at 4, Phil and Brigantine. Do you think they would consider adding an upgrade at the slot? Does Amari Cooper or Boyd fit at slot for a 1-year flyer, or are you good with Dotson? I like this question because I have seen Amari Cooper's name as a fit for Philadelphia now that the trade with Pickens has been made. I know Cooper was kind of mentioned as a fit for Dallas. I don't know if that they go that route. Now, they've been trading for a ton of receivers. They got Pickens. I'll get your thoughts on that trade too. But what about Phil's question?
Yeah, I don't see Cooper as an ideal slot. I know with Dallas, he played a Z, a move Z position, while Michael Gallup really was the X. I think in Buffalo, he moved around a little bit. I don't know that he's the ideal or natural slot, but he certainly, just by name, is an upgrade over whoever the Eagles are going to put in the slot position. Tyler Boyd, he was for a couple of years in Cincinnati a really, really good slot receiver. He is the type of guy I can see the Eagles taking a flyer on right before camp, like they did last year with John Ross and Paris Campbell, and seeing if he still got something left in the tank, and if he does, you probably release him before the start of the season. Try to get him on the training camp. While you keep your younger guys. But they have a lot of younger guys, Mike. They have Anaya Smith. They have Johnny Wilson. They have Jahan Dotson, like you said. They signed Terrace Marshall, who can play some slot, even though he's not a slot receiver. So Boyd is a guy I could see them kicking the tires on. But it's sort of like, does that mean he makes the team? Or does that just mean, like, he competes for a little bit, and if he's just okay, you try to get him on the practice squad?
All right, real quick, I know you got to get out of here. Does Pickens do anything for you? Does that change the complexion of Dallas?
Oh, hell yeah. How does it not? I mean, look what the alternative was. Jalen Tolbert. So, I mean, you worry about the combustibility. You worry about a first-year coach, Brian Schottenheimer, and how he's going to handle the sort of the ego and whatever it is that comes with Pickens. But I imagine a lot of Pickens' frustration was playing in Pittsburgh with a bunch of quarterbacks who weren't very good, not getting the ball enough. And now he's in a totally different environment. If Dak Prescott is healthy, Dak Prescott likes to drive the ball. And I could see him being a pretty happy receiver there. I think it's better for their offense. I think he complements CeeDee Lamb well because CeeDee is more of a Z receiver who can also line up in the slot, but he's not an X receiver. Pickens is your purest X receiver as it comes. Put him on the backside of that formation, let him run down the field, run the post, run the fly routes. And by the way, the guy he's most compared to, right, was his former teammate who never even played with him, was DK Metcalf, right? You heard a lot of those comparisons?
His former teammate, I like that.
I know, right? DK, it's like Frank Gore being an Eagle. But DK Metcalf's best year came his second year. I think it was 1,400 yards, 1,300 yards, 11 touchdowns. Who was the offensive coordinator for Seattle that year? Brian Schottenheimer. So Schottenheimer will have a good plan on how to use George Pickens.
All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN Football at 4. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast and Philly Voice, and, of course, here on Football at 4. All right, buddy. Appreciate it as always.
Out, Mike. Take care. Have a good one.